She left me at the altar on a Saturday in June, and for 10 years I told myself I was over it. I told myself that at the rehearsal dinner for my college roommate's wedding, where I drank 2 glasses of whiskey too fast and excused myself before the toasts. I told myself that on the morning I signed the lease on my apartment in the Mission District, standing in an empty room with a pen in my hand and nowhere to put the feeling that kept coming back. I told myself that at 32 and 33 and 34, whenever someone new sat across from me at dinner and said, "Tell me about yourself," and I gave them the version of me that had been carefully edited to remove the part that still didn't make sense. Her name was Claire Ashford. She was 25 when she left, and I was 26, and we had been together for 3 years and engaged for 8 months. I had stood at the front of St. Dominic's, church on Sacramento Street, with 112 people behind me and waited for 45 minutes before my best man put his hand on my shoulder and said what I already knew. She wasn't coming. There was no note that day. No phone call. No explanation that arrived in any form I could hold on to. She was simply gone, the way a light goes out, all at once, with no warning and no reason and nothing left in the dark to tell you what happened. My name is James Callahan. I'm 36 years old, and I live in a 1-bedroom apartment on Dolores Street in San Francisco, California, with a view of the park and the fog that comes in off the bay every evening, like it has somewhere to be. I work as an architect. I design buildings for other people to live in, which I have always found either ironic or appropriate depending on the day. I came back to San Francisco after Claire left because San Francisco was where I had built my life, and I was not willing to let her take the city too. I stayed, I worked. I built things for other people, and I did not think too carefully about what I was not building for myself. I was good at the work, better after Claire than before, which I have thought about. Something about loss makes a certain kind of precision possible. You stop caring about the things that don't matter because the thing that mattered is gone, and what is left is the work, and the work either holds or it doesn't. 10 years passed, not quickly, not slowly. The way 10 years passes when you are paying attention to everything except the one thing you never resolved. Then I ran into her sister. It was a Thursday in March. I was at a coffee shop on Valencia Street, the kind I went to because it was quiet in the mornings, and the espresso was serious and no one tried to make conversation. I was looking at site plans for a residential project in the outer Sunset, and I looked up to get more coffee, and Rachel Ashford was standing at the counter ordering something. Rachel, Claire's younger sister, 23 when I had last seen her, at the rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding, wearing a blue dress and looking nervous in the way that younger sisters look at rehearsal dinners. She was 33 now. She had the same dark eyes Claire didn't have, the Ashford family eyes, the ones that gave everything away. I saw her before she saw me, and I had exactly 3 seconds to decide whether to say anything. I said her name. She turned around. Her face went through 4 expressions in about 2 seconds, recognition and shock and something that looked almost like relief, and then something careful and controlled that settled over all of it. She said, "James." We carried our coffees to a corner table and sat across from each other in the gray San Francisco morning light. She asked about my work. I told her. I asked about hers. She was a nurse at UCSF. She'd been in San Francisco for 3 years. Then I said, "How is she?" Rachel looked at her coffee cup. She said, "James, there's something I need to tell you. I've been trying to decide for 3 years whether to tell you. I think I should. I think you deserve to know." I looked at her across the small table and felt something in my chest that had been very still for a long time begin, very slowly, to move. I said, "Tell me." She told me Claire had been sick. Not that day. Not the day she left. But she had known in the weeks before the wedding that something was wrong. She had been having symptoms she had been ignoring for months because she didn't want anything to interrupt the plans. She had finally gone to a doctor 10 days before the wedding. The diagnosis came back 4 days before. Stage 2. Treatable, the doctor said, but serious, requiring surgery and chemotherapy, and a recovery that would take the better part of a year. She had made a decision in 4 days. She had not told me. She had not told her family until after. She had simply decided that she would not let me watch her go through it, would not let me make the decision to stay out of obligation rather than choice, would not allow love to become caretaking before it had become a life. She thought she was protecting me. She thought, at 25, that disappearing was the kindest thing she could do. I sat with Rachel at the corner table, and I listened to all of this, and I did not say anything for a very long time. Rachel said, "She recovered. It took almost 2 years. She's been in remission for 8 years. She lives in Portland now. She has a good life, James. I want you to know that." I said, "Does she know you're telling me this?" Rachel said, "No, she doesn't know I'm in San Francisco. What she did to you, what she did to all of us, it damaged things. My parents didn't speak to her for a year. I came around eventually because she's my sister and she was sick, and I understood why she did it even when I thought it was wrong." I said, "Why are you telling me now?" She said, "Because I've carried this for 10 years and I think you deserve to understand it. You were 26 years old, and the woman you loved disappeared without explanation, and you have been living with that for 10 years. That's not fair. Whatever she thought she was doing, that wasn't fair." I said, "I need to walk." I walked up through the Mission and into Noe Valley, and up the hill toward Twin Peaks where you could see the whole city below you and the bay beyond it, and on a clear day the bridge, though today there was only fog where the bridge was supposed to be. I stood at the top of the hill with the city below me, and I thought about Claire Ashford. I thought about the 3 years we had been together. The apartment on Fillmore Street we had shared for the last year of it, the way she made coffee in the morning with the radio on low, and danced to it slightly when she thought I wasn't watching. I thought about the night I proposed, on the steps of Coit Tower, badly planned and sincere. The way she had said yes before I had finished asking. I thought about 45 minutes in the front of St. Dominic's Church, and then I thought about something else. I thought about a 25-year-old woman sitting alone with a diagnosis and 4 days to make a decision, without telling anyone, deciding that the people she loved would be better off if she disappeared. I had been angry for 10 years, not loudly, not in a way that made scenes or required management. The quiet kind of angry, the kind that sits in the chest and shapes every decision you make from the inside without announcing itself. The kind that had made me careful with every woman I met afterward, kept everyone at exactly the distance where it wouldn't break me if they disappeared. That anger was still there. It didn't go away when Rachel told me. Nothing she said made it go away, but underneath it for the first time there was something else. The particular grief of knowing that the person who hurt you was also, in some fundamental way, trying to protect you. That the disappearance had not been cruelty. It had been a terrified 25-year-old woman, making the worst decision she could have made for reasons that were not entirely wrong. That broke me in a way the original leaving had not. The original leaving I had been able to be angry about. This I could only grieve. I called Rachel 2 days later. I asked for Claire's number. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "James, are you sure?" I said, "I'm not sure of anything. I just need to say something to her." I held the number in my phone for 4 days without using it. 4 days of designing the Outer Sunset project and walking the city in the evenings and sitting, with the particular weight of 10 years of a story turning out to have a different shape than I had believed. On the 5th day, I called. She answered on the 3rd ring. She said hello and I knew her voice immediately, the way you know a voice you heard every day for 3 years even after 10 years of silence. It had the same quality it always had, slightly careful, like she was deciding while she spoke whether each word was the right one. I said, "It's James." The silence lasted long enough that I thought she might hang up. Then she said, "James, just my name." "The way you say a name when it means more than a name can hold," I said. "I talked to Rachel." Another silence. "Then she told you," I said, "Yes." "I need you to hear what the understanding cost me." She said, "Tell me," I said. "I spent 10 years being angry at a woman who vanished without explanation. I built my entire life around that anger, around the certainty that people leave and don't say why, and that the best protection is not to need anyone enough that it matters when they go. I was careful with every person I met after you. I kept everyone at exactly the distance where it wouldn't break me if they disappeared. And now I find out that the story I've been living in wasn't even the real one. The real one is worse in one way and better in another. I don't know how to be angry at a sick 25-year-old who was making the worst decision she could make for reasons I would have understood if she'd let me." Her voice when she answered was very quiet. She said, "I should have told you. I know that. What I did was wrong and I am not going to ask you to say otherwise." I said, "I know it was wrong. I'm not saying otherwise. I'm saying that I forgive you, not because what you did was forgivable in the way that makes it okay, Because I have been carrying the unforgiven version of this for 10 years, and it has shaped everything and I am done letting it. The line was very quiet. Then she said, James, I'm in San Francisco. I've been here for 2 weeks. My mother isn't well. I've been walking past St. Dominic's every morning on my way to the hospital and I didn't know what to do about it. I stood in my apartment on Dolores Street and looked out at the park and the fog, and I thought about all the shapes a story can take that you don't see coming. Said, have coffee with me. She said, I don't know if that's a good idea, I said, and it probably isn't. Have coffee with me anyway. She almost smiled. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. The particular silence of a person who is trying not to smile and failing slightly. She said, okay. She came the next morning. I had chosen a place on Sacramento Street not far from the church because I thought the proximity was honest. I didn't want either of us to pretend we weren't in the neighborhood of what had happened. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her hands around a cup. Long blonde hair the same. Blue-gray eyes the same. The particular quality of her stillness, the one that had always made her look like she was listening to something the rest of the room couldn't hear. The same. But 10 years was also visible. Not badly. Just honestly, the way time is visible in a face when you look at it knowing what it has carried. I sat down across from her. We looked at each other for a long moment. She said, you look the same. I said, you don't have to say that. She said, I'm not saying it to be kind. I'm saying it because it's true and it makes this harder. I said, why does it make it harder? She said, because the version of you I've been carrying for 10 years was supposed to have moved on completely. You were supposed to be unrecognizable. It was supposed to be easier than this. I said, it's not easier for me either. She looked at her coffee. She said, I know I don't have any right to say this, but I need to say it anyway. I have thought about you every day for 10 years. Not in a way that I let myself act on, but every day. You were the thing I could not stop knowing I had broken. The San Francisco fog sat outside the window, making everything look like the first scene of a story. I said, why didn't you call? When you were in remission. When it was over. She said, because I had already done the damage. Because I thought calling would be about me wanting absolution, not about you needing anything. I didn't want to reappear and ask you to make me feel better about what I'd done. I said, so instead you just let it sit there. She said, yes, I know how that sounds. I said, it sounds like another decision you made for me without asking me. She went very still. Then she said, yes, it was. We stayed at that corner table for hours. The coffee shop filled up and emptied around us and we stayed, and she told me the things she hadn't said. The diagnosis and the fear and the specific reasoning of a 25-year-old who loved someone enough to believe she was saving them by disappearing. And I told her the things I hadn't said, the 45 minutes at the altar and the years after and the careful distance I had kept from everyone. And the way anger had been a kind of structure when grief would have been a collapse. By the time we had finished, it was past noon, and the fog had lifted the way it sometimes does in San Francisco in the late morning, revealing the city underneath it, the hills and the white houses, and the sharp bright light that only exists here. Like the city is always a little surprised by itself. She said, I have 2 more weeks here, before I go back to Portland. I said, 2 weeks is enough time to have dinner. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, okay, 1 dinner. I said 1 dinner. She almost smiled. This time I could see it. We had dinner that Tuesday on Fillmore Street, not far from the apartment we had once shared, which was either careless or deliberate, and I never decided which. She ordered the same thing she always used to order, caught herself doing it, looked at me, and we both understood without saying it that some things go deeper than 10 years of trying to forget. We talked differently than we had at the coffee shop. Less about the past and more about the present, the lives we had built separately, what the building had cost and what it had made. She told me about her work in Portland, a community health clinic, the patients she carried home in her head at night. I told her about the Outer Sunset Project, about the particular pleasure of designing a house for a family, and knowing they would fill it with the kinds of things that make a house mean something. She said, you always talked about buildings like they were alive. I said, I think they are. I think they hold the shape of what happened in them. She looked at me for a long moment. She said, the James I knew at 25 was going to be a great architect. The James sitting across from me has been, I said. The Claire I knew at 25 was going to be someone who told the truth even when it was hard. She said, she got there. It just took longer than it should have. We walked after dinner, down Fillmore and through the Western Addition and up toward Alamo Square. the painted ladies and the view of the downtown skyline beyond them. We walked without plan or destination, and we talked and didn't talk, and the silence when it came was the kind that means something has settled, rather than something has ended. At the top of the hill, she stopped and looked at the city below us. She said, "I forgot how much I love this city." I said, "It missed you." She turned and looked at me. She said, "James, what are we doing?" I said, I don't know yet. I think we're finding out." She said, "I live in Portland." I said, "I know where you live." She said, "This can't be simple." I said, "Nothing about this has ever been simple. Why would we start now?" She looked at me with those blue-gray eyes in the evening light of San Francisco, with the city below us and the bay beyond it, and somewhere in the fog the bridge that was always there even when you couldn't see it. And she stepped forward and put her arms around me, not romantically, not as a claim, just as a person who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally found somewhere to set it down. I held her. The fog was coming back in over the bay the way it always came back in, certain and unhurried. She said into my shoulder, "I'm sorry it took me so long to tell you the truth." I said, "You told me now." She pulled back and looked at me, and for the first time since she had walked into the coffee shop, she smiled, fully, without holding anything back. The same smile I had seen years before we were anything to each other. The same smile. On the last day before she went back to Portland, she came to my apartment. She stood in the living room with its view of Dolores Park and looked at the bookshelves and the drafting table I kept by the window, and the particular organized disorder of a person who works at home and has stopped pretending otherwise. She said, "This looks like you." I said, "It looks like 10 years of me." She said, "I meant that as a compliment." She walked to the window and stood there the way she used to stand at windows, looking out at the city. The fog was low over the park. She said, "I'm not going to disappear again. I want you to know that." I said, "I know." She said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because you came to a coffee shop on Sacramento Street when you could have stayed in Portland and let Rachel's secret stay a secret. You came because you wanted to tell the truth more than you wanted to be comfortable. That's different from who you were at 25. She crossed the room and stood in front of me. She said, "I have thought about you every day for 10 years. I thought about you at the altar and in the hospital, and in every city I was in for the 2 years I was getting better and in every year after that. I thought about you the way you think about the thing you know you got wrong, the one you can't fix because the window is closed." She paused. She said, "And then the window wasn't closed, and I didn't know what to do with that." I said, "You came through it." She said, "You asked me to." I said, "You said yes." I reached out and took her hand and held it the way you hold something you have decided is worth the risk of holding. She didn't pull away. She kissed me at the door when she left. Briefly. The way you kiss someone when you mean it but aren't ready to say all the things the kiss contains. She called that evening from Portland. She said, "I want you to come here. I want to show you my real life, the one that exists when I'm not standing in someone else's city explaining myself." I said, "I'll come in April." She said, "April." I said, "April." She had left me at the altar on a Saturday in June. I had found out why on a Thursday in March, 10 years later. And it had broken me all over again. Not the same break, a different one. Cleaner. The kind that breaks the thing that was keeping you closed rather than the thing that was keeping you whole. Outside my window on Dolores Street, the San Francisco fog was doing what it always did. Coming back in from the bay, settling over the city, making everything soft and uncertain, and somehow more itself. The bridge was out there somewhere. It always was. You just couldn't always see it. That was okay. It didn't need to be seen to hold.